But I gotta tell you, I had a lot of fun with this topic today. That's why it's called the Stave is the Rave, because I don't think our barrel gets enough credit. And I wanted to make sure that I was very energetic today. I wanted to make sure that I had quite a bit of rest for you today. So I only drank Baker's 107 last night, because I knew we were gonna do some big, bold, barrel strength bourbons today. And we're gonna pair it with food. So we're gonna appreciate that, because you know what? The Stave's the Rave today. So if you have any takeaway at all from me personally, this is my little quote for today. Grains are the recipe. Yeast may be the soul, but all the magic of bourbon happens in the barrel. And I'll tell you who taught me that. All the magic of bourbon happens in the barrel. It was Lincoln Henderson. And when I was becoming a formal master taster, he taught me that. And I didn't quite believe him, because I knew there were so many variables to creating a great whiskey, right? But at the same time, I have to show you today all the secrets behind it. And the reason why I want to do that is because you see connoisseurs all the time. You see experts like me all the time. We stand in the front of the room and we go, oh, it's got such lovely barrel notes. Oh, I just love the barrel notes. But we really don't explain what we mean. So what does that mean? We just smell wood? No, we have a lot of flavor and a lot of spirit, if you will, in the barrel. So with that, let's first of all show a little respect for the barrel. Because in the 1800s, of course, the reason why the barrel even came into play is because it was kind of the UPS cargo of the day, right? That's how our whiskey, our good Kentucky whiskey, was transported down the Ohio River. I called that the superhighway of the 1800s, but it was transported down the river because they would use the barrels. And sometimes those barrels, believe it or not, they transported fish, apples, or whatever else they needed. And that's where charring kind of came into play, because before they put whiskey in it, they needed to get out those other flavors of the barrel that they used apples, fish, etc. for, so they'd char the inside of it. And little did they realize they were making something very special for Kentucky. And if you think about it, even our definition of bourbon, which was an act of Congress in 1964, requires actually for a barrel new, charred, and white oak. We can never use a barrel a second time. But what I can say is that all of these pieces of the barrel are used. And I'm going to show you that in a little bit too. So let's have a little bit of respect and see what I left for you. This is a stave. Do you feel the weight of this stave? Yeah? I want you to think of these as large blocks of sugar, okay? Large blocks of sugar, because it has some things in it, some properties in it, and this is how I ended up pairing some of the products that you all have today. I noticed some of you are nosing it, which is lovely. I love it. That's great. You're supposed to. But can you believe that 28 to 31 of these staves are used to make a barrel? You feel how heavy and stiff this is, right? This is a barrel head stave. And what they do, it's a handcrafted method. This wood is bent by steam, okay, to form the barrel. So this solid wood is formed, 28 to 31, and no wood glue, no nails, okay? It's handcrafted, the hoops are put on, and that's what you have the barrel. 100 pounds empty, almost 500 pounds full to roll that barrel. Okay, so that's just a little bit of that handcraftedness. But even more so, what's happening in our industry today is a lot of innovation with barrels. And that's why I was saying I don't think that we pay homage as much as we should. Think about this. This is an actual barrel with some stave inserts. So in other words, after you age the barrel, some distilleries are actually putting inserts in the barrel to add to the flavor. So they might season it for another 5 months or 4 months. I call that the finish. Another thing that's happening in the industry in innovation is infusion bags. Think about infusion bags. Everybody like a tea bag every now and then, steeping your tea? An infusion bag is a tea bag with bits and particles of wood, and they're steeped into the whiskey of the barrel. So you can see how creative we're getting. Brands like Devil's Cut that you've heard, they're actually soaking used barrels to get the best of that whiskey out of the barrel. And if you don't believe me, I brought a sample, as a matter of fact, and hopefully I'll pass this around for you. Just don't hit anybody in the head with it as you're passing. But this is how deeply the whiskey will soak into the wood. This is called the red line. The red line. That's how deep the whiskey, when you empty it, soaks into the wood, pulling those flavors and caramels. So I'll kind of pass that around so you can see it. But I'll tell you, as much as we try to innovate, as much as we try to control, the situation with the barrel and the warehouse of the barrel, Mother Nature kind of has its way with us, all right? We can't fight Mother Nature. And let me explain what I mean by that. There are certain variables that Mother Nature controls, and sometimes it's temperature related for a barrel. Other times, it might be weather related. And the beauty of it, and this is what people don't know sometimes, what happens inside the barrel. Inside the barrel, if you think of a big Mount Everest, which I have that first picture of Mount Everest, a lot of the whiskey has its main activity in the first 2 to 4 years, if you can believe it. In the first 2 to 4 years. Now, I will tell you, if you have whiskey less than 2 years, I call that headache whiskey, all right? And you might say it's really sharp or a little too spirited. If it's too long in the barrel and you leave that whiskey too long in the barrel and it tastes kind of astringent, etc., I call that over-oaked. We call that long in the tooth in Kentucky, okay? So think about climbing Mount Everest. All this work, it's really hard, but that's what's happening. Mother Nature's making it happen inside the barrel. Then we kind of go to the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains kind of not as hard to climb, but you're still working inside the barrel and you're still making that maturation of the whiskey, but it's kind of mellowing out a little bit. And then finally is the Appalachian Mountains, where it just over the years, you're not going to have a big climb at all. It's going to be a whole lot easier, but it just kind of gets complexity and color and those types of things that benefit. So those are the things that Mother Nature sometimes can bring to us. But you should know too, more on a scientific basis, there are a lot of compounds in this barrel, okay? And this is where Mother Nature meets science. There's a lot of compounds in this barrel that affect the flavors. And if you think about it, alcohol has a real affinity to wood. It likes wood. In fact, you know what it allows it to do? Alcohol in the wood allows us, and again, Mother Nature helps us with this, but through evaporation, it sometimes sends out, oops, sorry about that. Evaporation kind of sends out some of the not so great notes, all right, in the whiskey. And then what happens, what we want in the whiskey is it actually brings flavor notes inside the barrel. Okay, so that's a good thing for whiskey. It actually helps churn it. But the more sugar and the more tannins are in wine because of low barrel entry proof, 15% barrel entry. So you know what I say to you wine folks? You're sissies. 15%? Come on now, really. When we're having 125 proof whiskeys and barrel strength whiskeys, and we're not scared in Kentucky because we know that's going to bring complexity over time. We know that's going to bring depth over time. So I kind of get a kick that it's 15% entry proof on some of the wines that are put in. Also, when you think of a barrel proper, and let's just think about a barrel like it was a menu. If I never added any whiskey whatsoever to that barrel, and I just said, chew on that wood and tell me what you think. What you're gonna get is sweet, spice, wood. Sometimes from the wood, you're gonna get some nutty notes, okay? And then smoke, fruit, and floral. Now, do you see a little flavor and aroma grid to your right? Do you see that? We're gonna follow that pretty closely because it's my job today to kind of break down and dissect some of the flavors of this wood in its natural state and in its toasted and charred state. Because if I can dissect it down for you, you're gonna really understand your prize at the end. And the prize at the end is we've paired an hors d'oeuvre with it. You're gonna see how we build these up. Because by the end of this, there are 3 words I want you to use after drinking this whiskey that I've poured. And notice I didn't put the names of the whiskey, because I want to see how good you are in guessing some of these, right? But I want you to say they're plush. Hello, Christy. I want you to say they're engaging, and I want you to say they're downright seductive, all right? Because we're playing with the big boy bourbons today, all right? So let's get started. Here's how we're going to use this aroma and flavor grid. We're going to talk about food flavors first. Look at this little piece in front of you with an A on it, okay? That is vanilla. I just want you to open that up, take a little nose of it, dip your finger in it if you like, and also do me a favor once you're finished, put the lid back on so we don't dissipate all of the aromas in the room. But nose that a little bit. That is a very important flavor or food flavor in the wood because there's what's called vanillin in the wood. Literally, there is vanilla waiting to be part of our whiskey. So vanillin in the wood helps the extraction process, and that's why you taste sometimes the first note of a bourbon can be vanilla. Now the second one, I want you to kind of hold on to your seats here because it's intense, and this is clove. I just want you to nose it. There's nothing to taste. This is the aroma, sensory, but your olfactory senses, frankly, are sharper than your taste buds. Now, the reason why I want you to think of that clove, even though it is intense, if you know what clove is, it's a spice, right? But it's a flower from a tree. And it's very intense. It can be warm, it can be bitter, it can be flavorful. So when you think of variations that happen with spice, you can think of other types of spices that come along the way, like allspice, peppers, etc. But if I were to have my straight barrel, clove would be the first one to lead the process, okay? Now, let's go to the next one here. How about oak? I know that some of you picked up your stave that's in front of you, but go ahead and pick it up again if you didn't earlier, and nose that. One of my first training guidelines that I learned from Lincoln Henderson when he wanted to impress upon me the presence of wood in whiskey is he had me nose a glass of water. So you have a glass of water in front of you, so nose that glass of water. We're lucky in Louisville, we have pure tap, right? We have great water. Not much there though, right? You don't want to smell much from a glass of water. And then smell the wood in front of you. Because what he did was he took a bunch of toothpicks, this is a true story, took a bunch of toothpicks and he put the toothpicks in water and let them soak, and he said, Peggy, smell the water. Now smell the water with the toothpicks in it. We've only been sitting here 15 minutes. Now can you imagine over the course of 5 to 8 years with that alcohol sitting in the wood, what a difference that presence is going to make, right? So I was pretty impressed by that. Now, how about we try C? This is floral notes that come out from the wood. So what we did is we put a little bit of rose water because that's a pretty prominent floral note that you might find. And then other floral can come from that. You might have hibiscus. You might have a little bit of honeysuckle. But other florals along the way over maturation will happen. But I wanted you to heighten your senses, because this is a very sensory exercise. I wanted you to heighten your senses on the actual floral notes. And then in front of you on a little plate are some dried cherries. I want you to understand the fruit notes. So pick up a couple dried cherries, pop them in your mouth, chew on it a little bit, and see what you think. Because wood can bring out some cherry notes. Again, over time, those cherry notes turn into other fruit notes. Fruit notes like apricot. Fruit notes like apple. Those are two very basic ones that would come out. But I want you to have that baseline before we move in. Make sense? All right, good. So if you're not too full after eating 2 cherries, we're going to go ahead and move to the other ones. Smoke. The smokiness, which also can turn very quickly to savory, but I'm going to give you an example on your tongue later of what savory really means. So the smokiness of bacon made sense to me. So if you'll try a little piece of the bacon strip, if you don't care for bacon, that's just fine. But I want you to gain an understanding of what that does to your tongue, that smokiness. It's a little heavier, right? A little heavier, a little bit more texture to your tongue, but we have a good understanding of that. And as we move each one, just to let you know, you might want to take a bit of a rinse of your water. If some of the nosing, just to let you know, if some of the nosing, like the clove, gets a strong sense for you, a little trick we use is to smell the back of your hand. It will neutralize your olfactory senses, just smelling the back of your hand. And that allows you to go to the next area, okay? So you can see, as we follow along this flavor grid and aroma grid, the master distiller has a hell of a lot of decisions to make. There are so many variables to the barrel. In other words, when he decides to toast it and char it, which we're going to talk about and taste those flavors, how deep does he want to go? So this represents the coloring. This also represents, does he want to start spicy and go all the way to butterscotch? How much chocolate notes does he want or she want? So think about dialing up or dialing down what happens inside the barrel over the years. The master distiller needs to make that decision, and they need to make a lot of other decisions about what goes inside the barrel, and we're going to talk about that. So let's talk now about inside the barrel. In the second column of your flavor grid, we're going to talk about what I call interior flavors. Interior flavors are certainly the toasting and charring, okay? But as far as the toast goes, many people think, oh, well, once you toast the wood, you get more of the caramel notes. And I'm not saying, I don't disagree with you, but many times when I do tastings, I talk about, after tasting, I'll say it has a really, it's framed with toast, or it has a toasted framework. And the reason why I say toasted framework is because that toasting of the caramelization is all working together for me. Okay, so it just has a light toast. Remember that when we start talking about our appetizers. So take a bite of the crostini that's on your small plate. Just take a little bite of that. Plain, simple, but need you to identify that toast flavor. And then there is a caramel on your plate. Go ahead and unwrap that and take a little bite of the caramel. Now notice, I did not, and it was purposeful, I did not do a dark caramel. I did a light caramel. You know, frankly, it's a craft caramel that you probably remember dipping apples in, right, to make candy apples. Very light, very airy, you know, nothing that's going to make it too heavy for you. But what we're doing when I told you that those staves are large blocks of sugar, we are caramelizing the wood sugar of the barrel. We're taking a flame to the wood and just simply caramelizing. So anybody like creme brulee in here? Okay, it's like the topping of a creme brulee. Light and airy, but not burnt, not smoked, just light and airy. And so that's what we're going for with toasting. And as I mentioned, it certainly does move to the caramel, but it's not a heavy caramel, and that's important to note. Now, are you ready to kind of go into the fun part? The fun part is moving into the charring. The charring is taking a very intense flame to the wood, and we're blistering the wood. Do you know why we're doing that? We want to open up the pores of the wood so that great whiskey soaks in and out and in and out of that wood. I also attribute charring to that beautiful rich amber color, that depth of color we have in whiskey. I also contribute to that campfire smokiness that we have in whiskey that's so wonderful. So with charring, you're going to get many things, okay? We're kind of moving from that caramel that you just took a bite of to a little bit deeper caramel. And the best example I could possibly give you, and you were probably wondering when you were looking at everything that I have for you to eat in 1 hour, that piece of chocolate that's in the white cup. Let me share what this is. This has special meaning to me because this is called a Majeska. A Majeska is considered Louisville's candy. And my father, this is what I grew up on, frankly, in Kentucky, are Majeskas. My father, it was one of his absolute favorite candies, and now I know why, because he could drink it with his bourbon. So what you're gonna have here is dark chocolate, marshmallow, all right, and then caramel. So you're gonna get the triple crown all right, of charring flavors. This is identical to charring flavors. So take a big bite, but save half of it for later, because I have a bit of an explosion prize at the end of this for your mouth, I promise. So save half of it for later. What do you think of that? You get that? You get that chocolate, caramel, marshmallow, wonderful combination? See, that's what happens with charring. It's like a little campfire, like a s'more almost. I feel at this point you've had a nice little preamble for your mouth, all right? You've learned a few flavors along the way. We're going to do a couple more. But at the same time, I have to turn, because my inner geek turns out a little bit during this session. I said toasting, I said charring, I said white oak wood, which is all extremely important. But there's a lot of chemistry that happens. And so this is where my inner geek comes out. So I want to share a couple things with you. This is just wood notes, and believe me, not all barrels are created equally. All right, so when you go to a cooperage and you see sometimes the barrel staves outside, they're being seasoned. And they're outside and they're drying out, because what that does when you season the wood, it actually lessens the density of that hard block that you just touched. All right, it lessens the density so that air flows through it, whiskey flows through it a lot easier. All right, so that's part of it. And also, we're trying to bring out the esters. Esters are just a fancy word for staying flavors. We want wood sugars and we want tannins. We want the best of wood sugar, we want the best of tannins. And then this is a sample of a wood block up close. And all those little dots and all those little veins, if you would, this is called Tylosi. Tylosi is very important, and the only way I can describe it to you of what happens in the barrel is almost like capillaries, all right? If I were to hold a handful of straws in my hand, very loosely, and I poured water over those straws, what would happen? The water would go straight through, right? Well, what Tylosi does for us is if I were to hold those straws and squeeze it a little bit, some are open, some are not open. You know, some might have a little bit of water fall through once I pour. That's what Tylosi does. It lets the tannin soak in a little slower, so it's not rushed. So that's what it helps us do, and that's a very important piece to helping with the flavor components and bringing out the right things that we want for our whiskey. So the next thing that's a variable to think about, and this is the hardest thing, oxygenation, or just plain oxygen and airflow to make it easy. This is the hardest thing for a cooperage to really get their hands on, and I go back to Mother Nature helping us along a little bit. But oxygenation is really important, because the more air that's flowing through, the more fruit notes, floral notes. Also what we want to happen is oxidation. When people say, well, what the heck is oxidation? I have no idea what that is. Think of an apple. If it was sitting on a table and you left it there a couple days, it might brown a little bit, and it actually gets sweeter as it goes sometimes. That's what happens within the barrel. Oxidation with the vanillin and the wood sugar, it's going to kind of oxidize, and that actually mellows and brings more flavors. So you want oxidation inside the barrel. So that happens as well, and it can also bring some earthy notes. Now I want you to taste, there's a little sliver of mushroom, because I want you to understand what earthy notes bring in your palate. So take a little bite of the mushroom. Everybody identify the mushroom? It almost looks like a brownie. They sauteed it for me, right? So it's good, but take a little bite. That is an earthy note. That is an earthy note, and you can get earthy notes from this, and also from the next thing that I want to talk about, and that's water. Water is key. You know, the first point of water that we're going to experience with the barrel is what? Anybody know? Anybody know the first time that we experience water with a barrel? How about barrel entry? Now, in Kentucky, of course, we can go up to 125, but some distilleries really debate what the barrel entry of their whiskey is going to be. You know, as low as 103 with Michter's, 110, I think makers in Woodford Reserve use, but you can go up from there. So think about when water goes with the whiskey inside the barrel for the first time, it's a bit of a marriage, right? It's a bit of a marriage. They have to react together. So the more water that you put in the barrel for the first time, over time, evaporation's going to happen. And that's also a water feature, if you will. Evaporation happens, and when evaporation happens, the alcohol proof actually goes up because of the evaporation. Has anybody in here heard of the term angel share? And you know how we always talk about the angel share, the evaporation of the whiskey going up, and we can lose 28 to 30%. So it's no joke that there's evaporation. But I have to tell you that sometimes that evaporation takes off some of the off notes of a product. So you wonder if those angels up there are going, too much tannin, too much acid. We joke about it like it's a great thing. Yes, okay. So back to this, another thing that is important is humidity. Think of the humidity that you have. Humidity actually slows the interaction within the barrel. And then the water that you actually put when you pour a glass of whiskey and you put some water with a splash, that actually opens up the fruit notes of a whiskey. So you can really focus on the fruit notes of the whiskey.